Hello, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm here with Andrew Fesiak, who's an expert on Ukraine and lives in the Ukraine and has been reporting to us on Economics Matters, the podcast. This is, I believe, his fourth appearance since the beginning of the war to talk to us about, exactly what's happening. To the extent that anybody can know, Andrew seems to be as up to date as anyone on things going on the ground. But Andrew's got an extensive background uh, in in Eastern Europe and Eastern Europe studies, European studies, and political science, in journalism. Andrew, give us a quick introduction to Andrew for those who haven't heard you before, seen you before. Fill us in on your background, and then we'll go on to talk about where things are.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm born and raised in Canada. My parents are Ukrainian, but from Poland. First time I ever visited the Soviet Union, Soviet Ukraine, was in 1985, just after Gorbachev got into power. I was 15 years old at the time. Fell in love with Ukraine at the time, and I'd gone back since that time. I've been there every year since 85. I have not been there three separate years since that time. I came back to after I finished high school in Canada. I actually went to study at Kiev State University, Tarashevka Kiev State University, at the Faculty of Journalism. I studied there for 2 years, so 89 to 91, just before the Soviet Union
Mhm.
fell apart. Then I came back to study at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, where I studied at at first was the Institute of Soviet and East European Studies. Then, as soon as the Soviet Union fell apart, a few months later, it was renamed into the Institute of Central East European and Russian Area Studies. So I did my BA and MA there, and then I went on to do PhD studies at York University in Toronto. I've now been living in Ukraine, so kind of Soviet studies, Ukraine, Russia, international relations between them, military affairs. This has always been my interest. My master's thesis was on actually nationalism in the Ukrainian military. And I've now been living in Ukraine for over 2 decades, and I've absolutely loved it, actually. And of course, the Russians invaded 11 years ago. Now there's the large-scale invasion, which is not fun, of course, because there's bombs falling outside my apartment window on a almost daily basis, actually.
Okay, so thank you for that. And I think I, like essentially most Americans who have any real knowledge of the world, um, appreciate your uh, appreciate Ukraine, appreciate that Ukraine is really defending our country and democracy and civilization in this terrible war, and appreciate everything you're doing to try and help Ukraine. Uh, so tell us where things are, at the military level to begin with. Uh, we hear lots um of scary things that appear scary about Ukraine's future because uh, the main thing we hear is that the U.S. is doing nothing uh, relative to what it was doing before under Biden, that the U.S. is pulling back from supporting Ukraine. Nothing is too strong because we understand that there's still intelligence sharing and some degree of support, some permission of Europeans to provide, to buy at probably a high price equipment from the U.S. to provide to Ukraine, but nothing like the degree of assistance that was provided free of charge uh, under Biden to Ukraine. Uh, so, so we're wondering, how this is impacting the military situation, and whether, let me put it this way, whether the U.S. is uh, knifing Ukraine in the back at this point in the sense of restricting, limiting what Ukraine can do with its equipment that it's been already that it has that have any U.S. components, limiting what other allies can do to help Ukraine, limiting what it's doing, uh, and really siding with Russia, but not being upfront about it, or whether that's an overstatement, whether President Trump and his administration are trying to keep the doors open, communication, and are uh, under the cover, uh, off the radar, assisting Ukraine in ways that the public is not aware of. So give us, we're really just seeing, people like me are just seeing what we hear in the news, and we know that what the news is reporting is generally not the full story or the correct story.
Right. So look, since we spoke last, and last time we spoke, it was March, I believe, end of March this year. So that's like, half a year ago. I told you that Ukraine was producing 40% of its own weapons. Ukraine's now producing over 60% of its own weapons. So I think, the Ukraine side knew what could happen if Trump got into power. And so, nobody believed it probably until he got elected. I know I certainly didn't believe he would get elected. I thought the Americans would be, make a wiser decision. In any case, but now that he's been elected, I think everything Trump has done, he's shown that he's not on the Ukraine side. He keeps blaming Ukraine, that Ukraine invaded Russia, and you shouldn't invade a country that's 20 times your size and then ask me for missiles, right? It's almost a quote, and Trump's repeated that now numerous times. Obviously, someone like that is not someone that's on your side when you're, just completely lying about who invaded who. Obviously not. So the Ukrainians, of course, I think have understood this, and this is why they've made amends. They've ramped up their own production of military equipment. It's to the point right now where, like I said, 60% of the weapons are produced by Ukraine. Just a few days ago, the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, has made an announcement that he's going to allow Ukrainian weapons manufacturers to actually start exporting certain types of weapons, which Ukraine now has in abundance. So that's great. That is very good for the Ukrainian economy. It's great for Ukrainian weapons manufacturers, and that also means that because they'll be able to sell weapons abroad, they'll be making money and they'll be able to reinvest into Ukrainian weapons manufacturing. So this is a big difference, from 6 months ago. This is not some large amount of weapons which will be exported, but still it's already a start where we're at that point where Ukraine's not only begging for weapons, Ukraine is now making 60% of its own weapons and is going to start exporting certain types of weapons. So for example, the sea drones that Ukraine makes, Ukraine's the world leader in sea drones. Ukraine will now be exporting certain types of those weapons to partner countries, of course. When it comes to drone manufacturing, I mean, Ukraine is the world leader when it comes to making drones, so ones that fly and sea drones. Although I don't think they would be exporting those, the drones that fly, just because Ukraine really does need those still. Since we spoke last, Ukraine's now come out and started making certain, not just FPV drones, first-person view drones, which are the short distance ones, which range around 40 kilometers, which they heavily use on the front lines, which are actually responsible for 80% of the deaths on the front lines. So that again, and I told you that I think 6 months ago, but that's something which is extremely important. So Ukraine does not rely as much on artillery shells as it did over a year ago when the just prior to the electoral campaign in the United States, when your House, when Speaker Johnson refused to bring to a vote the weapons package for Ukraine. And for 7 months, Ukraine wasn't receiving any weapons. So this was actually a big wake-up call also to Ukraine. And so in that time, artillery shells were crucial. They were crucial. Now they're not as important. They are important, but not nearly as much because of the drone situation. So this is extremely important. Furthermore, Ukraine started to make all sorts of not only drones, but even ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. They're starting to come out with these. It's just starting now. There's a Ukrainian drone. It's kind of the most powerful right now. It is called, it's a cruise missile, sorry. It's called the Flamingo. And this Flamingo, which basically when they've compared it to the U.S. Oh, was it the Tomahawk missile? It is actually probably more powerful. On paper, it is more powerful. It reaches a distance of 3,000 kilometers. Okay, so that is huge. That is an extremely far distance where Ukraine can now hit basically anything in European Russia. And in European Russia is where they have the majority of their industries and oil and gas facilities and things like this. So that's extremely important. Right now, the company which makes Flamingo has stated they're making about 50 missiles, cruise missiles per month, but they're going to ramp that up to 7 per day. So that's far more. So right now, I think Ukraine has used them, but they haven't used them very much because they're probably just getting them stockpiling them so that they can have a massive attack a little bit later. But there's all sorts of other drones that Ukraine's also been using. So in that sense, Ukraine is doing much, much better. And the very, very important thing about having these long distance drones is that Ukraine's Western partners, the Europeans and Americans, were not allowing Ukraine to hit the Russians with the missiles that the Americans and Europeans were giving Ukraine. Then the last, I think, month that Biden was in office, he did allow Ukraine to start hitting Russia within Russia with American missiles. Now Trump he has reversed this policy again. So now Ukraine can no longer use American missiles like the ATACMS to hit within Russia. Okay, and what they've done is they've disallowed the Europeans to allow Ukraine to hit within Russian territory because the Brits and the French are giving Ukraine the British Storm Shadow missile and the French Scalp, which is basically the same missile. They produce these jointly. They develop and produce them jointly, just have different names and depending on which country. They have slight differences between them. And so, but there are certain American components in those missiles. And so the Americans have said, the Trump administration, that you cannot use those missiles to hit Russia either. So, the Trump administration is basically protecting Russia. I mean, this makes no sense. If it was some sort of a fear that, oh my God, Russia could escalate, well, that fear should have been forgotten about because when Biden allowed Ukraine to hit Russia with those missiles, nothing happened. No nuclear war, no nuclear attack, nothing. Absolutely nothing, right? And so nonetheless, Trump has now removed the permission to use those. So that is, just support for Russia, basically. However, again, it's not as crucial because Ukraine's making actually, missiles which reach a further distance. And in the last few months, Ukraine has been attacking Russian oil and gas facilities, weapons depots, command headquarters, and all sorts of other things massively. Not as massively as they need to, but to the point where in Russia, this is really hurting their economy. There are massive lineups in certain regions, waiting to tank up at the gas station because there's just a major deficit of gasoline. So this is having an effect. It is having an effect. Ukraine has also hit shipyards where they export gas, crude oil, rather. And so this is also going to have an effect. When this Flamingo missile is produced to a larger scale, Ukraine will then be able to hit, all these sorts of objects much more massively. Just last night, there was a big attack on Moscow, actually, and we don't have the details yet of what exactly was hit, destroyed. Although the mayor of Moscow did say that the Russians downed 40 Ukrainian drones. Okay, so they say how many drones were down. They don't say how many drones were hit. So we're still waiting for intelligence to understand, what exactly was hit. But so a lot of things have changed actually, and Ukraine isn't as reliant on Western permissions. Ukraine does not need any Western permission to use its own drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles against Russia, and that's great. So because before this was a big, big problem. So really, the hold that the Trump administration has on Ukraine is far reduced. Now, this doesn't mean that Ukraine is not, asking for weapons. There is a certain policy, which Ukraine has with the Europeans. It's called the Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, the PURL. And according to this list, I mean, the Europeans can buy weapons, American weapons for Ukraine. They can pay for them, and then the U.S. will, well, deliver them to NATO apparently, which then gives them to Ukraine. Uh, Word is that a few days ago, certain things arrived. I think it's Patriot rockets, maybe, but nonetheless, there's not much that has arrived this way. But the United States, the Trump administration, does not pay for these. These are paid for by European NATO members.
I'd like to talk to you about a really powerful financial planning tool to help you make smart retirement and other critical financial decisions. It's a tool that factors in all your financial data and shows you what you can sustainably spend every year for the rest of your life. That tool is my software company's Maxify Planner. It's incredibly powerful, it's accurate, and it's easy to use. Maxify takes the guesswork out of financial decisions at every stage of life. Its focus is on raising, de-risking, and sustaining your living standard. Maxify lets you run what-if scenarios to see how your finances will change in taking new jobs, buying a home, doing Roth conversions, retiring early, downsizing, investing more in the market, you name it. Knowing the impact of these decisions before you make them is the secret to making smarter decisions. And it's also the secret to what we all seek, which is financial peace of mind. So please visit Maxify.com today to start planning. That's Maxify with an I, Maxify.com, Maxify.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. So what do you think is driving Trump to apparently back Russia? I presume that the intelligence sharing is still going on. I presume that Musk is still providing satellite internet to Ukraine. So we don't want to kind of overstate any withdrawal of support for Ukraine. But I mean, is this is it possible that Trump is trying to get onto Putin's good side so that he'll become more reasonable? Do you think that's his strategy, or do you think there's something more devious going on here, that he's somehow under Putin's thumb, somehow a form of an asset to Russia for some reason?
I'll just mention about the intelligence sharing. As you know, the Trump administration cut off intelligence sharing to Ukraine, something like it was in March, I believe, just after the meeting in the Oval Office between Zelensky, Trump, and his horde. So yeah, but that was returned. I've not heard anything about them removing intelligence sharing since then. However, you have to understand that this isn't a one-way street. When it comes to intelligence sharing, I mean, Ukraine has its own intelligence. Ukraine has people on the ground there, which are probably providing the Americans with a great deal of intelligence also, and Ukraine's NATO partners. Ukraine has a very, very good intelligence gathering capability. So, of course, the US has the best of spy satellites in the world. But when it comes to things on the ground, I think the Ukrainians are doing, probably have a lot of a better capability. In May of this year, as you know, I'll just give a reminder to the viewers, there was this massive Ukrainian attack on 5 different Russian air bases, which had long-range strategic bombers. This was the spiderweb plan, and what they attacked basically was up to 40 different strategic areas. So these are actually, when I say strategic bombers, these are the ones that Russia would be using to bomb the United States with nuclear weapons. Okay. However, they're also using these to bomb Ukraine. So Ukraine bombed 5 different bases spanning 5 time zones. The one furthest away was over 4,000 kilometers away. Ukraine had the intelligence. They put this together. The United States knew nothing about it, absolutely nothing about it. So when Zelensky was sitting in the Oval Office being lectured by Trump about him having no cards, Zelensky already knew that this plan was already in action and that it was going to be launched soon enough, within a couple of months. And this just showed that Zelensky actually has a lot of cards. And this was a major intelligence operation, which was, I mean, it was something not seen in the history of intelligence in the world. Okay. Again, the United States had no idea that this was going to happen, and we know also from the beginning of this major invasion right now by the Russians that when the Ukrainians did share intelligence, certain intelligence with the United States, that intelligence was leaked. And so I'm sure that's why right now, when this happened, when the spiderweb operation happened, they did not share this intelligence. They did not inform the Trump administration. And I'm sure they probably know that within that administration, I mean, you've got people like Tulsi Gabbard, who is always repeating Kremlin talking points. You've got Kash Patel, who was paid, I forget how much money, but he was paid a certain amount of money to make pro-Russian propaganda, actually. And this is open information. So do you think the Ukrainians are going to share intelligence about a very important operation with the Trump administration after something like this? Probably not. And that's why this was so successful, because nobody knew about it. But again, so with the intelligence, it's not a one-way street. I mean, the Ukrainians have their own intelligence, which is probably very important for the Americans also. And I think, this is a card in Ukraine's hands where they could also tell the Americans, well, look, okay, you don't give us intelligence, we stop giving you intelligence also about these certain things.
This disclosure of intelligence that you just referenced that Ukraine gave the U.S. that was then disclosed to the Russians. Can you say anything specific about that?
There was a young, this is actually mind-boggling if you think about it. There was a young U.S. intelligence officer, military intelligence officer, and I don't remember the name, but he basically shared, because he had intelligence about the Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023, and he shared it with his friends on, I think it was Facebook or Twitter or something like this. And of course, this leaked the Ukrainian plans. And so that's why that just one more reason why that 2023 Ukraine counteroffensive was not successful. So he was arrested, of course, and he's in jail right now, I believe. But nonetheless, it just shows that, listen, this was just some minor level intelligence officer, which he spilled the beans on this. So can you imagine how
So
many
that
people in the U.S. intelligence establishment knew about these plans? Which means that, I mean, of course, the more people that know things, the more, possibility there is that, these plans will be leaked.
okay,
And
but we
that's
don't know that Trump directed that this be disclosed. Nothing like that.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, it's not that, some would think Trump would say something. I mean, I don't know, but I should hope not. But I think, of course, Ukrainians probably felt it's much better, just to tell nobody, of course. And of course, the other thing about telling nobody is then you don't need the Americans or Ukraine's Western partners kind of, getting all scared and saying, no, no, don't do that, don't do that. Oh my God. So, they didn't tell anyone. They carried it out. It happened, right? And it was extremely successful. And of course, what was the Russian reaction? As always, nothing, right? They they basically, polished over it, said that nothing really happened, kept quiet about it. And this is always the case with the Russians. When you hit them hard, they will just say nothing happened, okay? Because they're too ashamed to say that, yeah, Ukraine, this country which was supposed to be defeated within 3 days, who they were supposed to denazify and demilitarize, has now hit 5 different Russian air bases in 5 different time zones, 40 different aircraft. This is an amazing feat. Okay. So, they're going to just keep it quiet because, of course, this is extremely shameful for them. Right.
So, I mean, one view of Trump, I mean, we have these kind of erratic, uh, narcissistic, you know, uh, episodes. So there seems to be some degree of irrationality in this person. Uh, uh, I don't think it's standard for somebody to go to a state dinner in in Britain and proclaim that the U.S. economy is hot and over again when it's not particularly hot. Uh,
But I don't think he means it's no. I think he didn't he say it's not the economy is hot. I think he said America's the hottest country or something like this, and he means it in like a sexual way, like saying a woman is hot. I think that's what he means, which is just extremely strange. I mean, that's
I'm
just
not sure
extreme.
whether the economy or the country, but
Yeah,
it's just unusual language. Let's put it this way: it's
yes,
unusual, and I would say despicable for him to try and dress down President Zelensky for defending. Here we have uh, the equivalent of Churchill being dressed down by somebody who's not the equivalent of Roosevelt at all. I mean, what a disgraceful act on the part of our president and vice president. I think that probably doomed Vice President Vance's future political future, although I don't know. So many crazy things have happened in our country politically. We have a very different uh, mentality among some people than we had in the past. But I think the majority of Americans understand that having gone through two world wars, we don't want to be in a third world war, and that Ukraine is defending the U.S. So, uh, but setting aside Trump's personality and some of his behaviors and those of his companions. Uh, uh, One view would be that he's just transactional, that he's looking for what's going to be best for the U.S. And if at the moment Russia appears to be in the stronger position vis-a-vis Ukraine, we should side with the country that's in the stronger position. And you could look at Europe and say, well, they don't have much of a defense, if they're weak European militarily compared to Russia. They don't have this uh, the capacity, let alone the will, and that there's a chance that Russia could take over Europe, and we need to be on the side of who's ever going to be in charge. But now he might, if that were the case, then he might be switching positions, seeing that Ukraine is now perhaps according to you, at least, in a position maybe to reverse uh, the scenario, the direction of the war, course of the war. Um, or he might, in that context, he might be sitting on the sidelines and say, "Let me see who wins out." Or there could be something else here that he's been pro Putin for many years, right? Uh, and the question then is where that's coming from. Do you have any inside information on that?
well, I don't have inside information, but I mean, it's look, there's it's funny. There's this one person on Twitter or X as it's called now, and his name is he goes by the name of Darth Putin. Okay, so it's a funny name, and he basically it's a parody account of Vladimir Putin. And so he's got this one quote, and I'm going to read it to you, and it says this. And this is about, it says, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, denies it's a duck, demands you prove it's a duck, accuses you of being a duck, says your dog is a duck, and that it won't poo on your grass anymore if you just give it your garden, it's a Kremlin duck, right? This is very funny. This is, he says this. In any case, look, Trump has done so many things that simply, I mean, they're helping Russia. They're not helping Ukraine. From,
So
earlier
we
on, trying to force Ukraine to capitulate, basically, which didn't work. Then holding meetings in Alaska. I mean, isn't it strange that this meeting that he had in Alaska with Putin, first of all, the fact that he invited him to a meeting in Alaska was extremely strange. So, you've invited the president of Russia, an imperialist, to Alaska. which Russia sold to the United States, okay, and which many Russians still want back. So they want to get Alaska back. Why, of all places, would you invite him there? Why not meet on neutral territory? That was already strange. But just think back when Trump was going to Alaska, he was saying, "That's it, that's it. We need a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire. We need the fighting to stop. Ceasefire." That was his major thing. Ceasefire. He's going to force everyone into a ceasefire. And then he talks to Putin, gives him literally the red carpet treatment, and that was extremely shameful. With the U.S. Army soldiers sitting there on their knees, in front of the Russian airplane, getting this red carpet together. I mean, it was extreme, is strange. But after the meeting with Putin, all of a sudden Trump changes his tune. That no, we just need to, finish the war, finish the war. No ceasefire, no, finish the war. So exactly what Putin's told him to say. Okay. And then, of course, he repeats after that, yeah, Ukraine started the war. Ukraine started the war. You can't attack a country that's 20 times your size. And he said that many times. This is just, it seems like, Putin is sticking this in his head. I mean, where else does he get these ideas from? They're massive lies. They're extremely, it's shameful to say something like this. And yet he keeps repeating it. Okay. Very strange.
Want more money, less risk, and a better life? Buy Money Magic, a new book by Lawrence Kotlikoff, Boston University economist, personal finance expert, and best-selling author. Whether it's education, career, marriage, housing, investing, retirement, Social Security, IRA, or 401k decisions, Money Magic delivers scores of secrets to raise your living standard. Financial journalist Jane Bryant Quinn says Money Magic is a must-read. Nobel laureate George Akerlof says Money Magic is quite probably the best financial advice book ever written. Financial guru John Malden says, you'll love this amazing book. It's full of wit, wisdom, and startling paths to a better financial life. And columnist Scott Burns calls Money Magic a funny, brilliant read, offering wildly powerful, unconventional choices that can literally change your life. Get Lawrence Kotlikoff's Money Magic today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent booksellers.
Okay, so I don't know where we're going to figure out what's going on. I mean, it seems like there's two possibilities. One is the man is deranged, just not processing information correctly, actually cares about the U.S., but is somehow, just screwed up in his head about reality. And that could well be. I mean,
Yeah.
we just had this, every day there's something kind of weird that happens. Yesterday it was, well, we do have a, major concern about autism in births in the U.S. And here he is saying pregnant women shouldn't use Tylenol. I guess maybe that's not crazy. Maybe that's a warning, a useful warning, because there's some degree of evidence, I guess, that there's a possible concern, but the medical community is not on board on this. So anyway, he's taking the role of playing chief doctor.
Right. But isn't this the same guy who said during the COVID pandemic that what was it? You can inject yourself with, was it chlorine or something, or something?
Yes, drink chlorine, yeah, or something like that.
Or something like this, and it'll get rid of the chlorine. So I mean, what can I say?
Yeah.
Look, I'll tell you what I think.
It was joking. Everything is after the fact considered a joke, but so I guess okay. So let's just say, let me ask it point blank. Do you think he's an asset of the Russians? Do you think he's under Putin's? He's following Putin's orders or suggestions because he is obligated or worried about some compromising information that would be revealed.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, in our last podcast, I believe we did speak about many of the things which his ties, to the Soviet Union and Russia, how, his first wife, her father was a Czechoslovak communist, secret agent with ties to, of course, the Russian KGB, and we know three different former KGB agents from three different Soviet countries, by the way, who actually have come out separately and said that yes, he was actually Agent Krasnov, he was known as. So the KGB was working on him. That doesn't mean he was agent, no, but they were working on him as an agent of influence, kind of someone that they could, they could see he's a narcissist, he loves money, and they could work on this guy. And it's true that when he visited the Soviet Union, I believe the first time he went was 1989 or 91, he came back, I think it was 89, he came back and all of a sudden he changed his tune. All of a sudden he wanted to run for president. He was anti-NATO. He was already making anti-NATO statements back then. So we know about all this. We also know that he had 6 bankruptcies, that he was saved by the Russian mafia, which were buying his properties at non-market prices. The prices they were paying were higher than the market value, which is very strange. Okay, this to me looks like just a way to give someone money without it registering as a bribe or as corrupt money, kind of. So we know these things openly. Okay. Since then, however, okay, he's been elected. We know what he did last year when he, stopped, Ukraine from getting weapons for 7 months, because of what Johnson didn't bring that vote to the floor of the House. And we know all sorts of things he's done right now. The president of Portugal came out a couple of weeks ago and openly stated that Trump is a Russian asset, Russian and Soviet asset. I mean, this is interesting. The president of Portugal actually said this. Okay. So, but there's all sorts of other academics who are, highly regarded academics who also feel the same way. Trump has done so many things now that he's done certain things against Ukraine, but then there's other things he's done, things which he could have done to help Ukraine, and he has not. He's kept saying that, so he makes these comments about, oh, I'm upset with Russia, I'm upset with Putin. Oh, I'll give, and then within 2 weeks, he's going to put major sanctions on Russia. There's been so many 2-week periods now that, everyone's lost count already. He's never done it. So he says certain things. And I think that the reason he says this is because he has people in his party who are very supportive of Ukraine. They are very pro-American first and not pro their own pocket first, which is what I believe Trump is. He's not America first. He's Trump first. Okay. And so there's, great supporters of Ukraine within the Republican Party. And so he probably needs to assure them that, no, of course, I'm against Russia. I'm on the side of Ukraine. And so that's why he makes statements which are maybe possibly, sound like they're anti-Russian, but then he does nothing. And his latest thing was that he said, yeah, well, we'll sanction Russia only when all of the NATO countries, not even EU countries, the NATO countries stop purchasing Russian oil and gas, I believe. This is interesting. He knows that that's impossible, okay? Because, what that means is Putin's friends in Europe, like Hungary and Slovakia, so the last 2 countries that, massively import and are massively reliant on Russian crude oil, there's no way they're going to get rid of importing Russian oil because, of course, this will help Russia. Now,
okay,
because Trump will only impose sanctions if they stop buying Russian crude oil.
I presume. Okay, so if
well, one second, let me finish this. This is important. The next thing I'm going to say, though. However, Trump didn't say the European Union because, look, I believe that Trump first came in and said, "Yeah, NATO is horrible. You guys are just using America. You're not getting up to the 2% of GDP level to buy weapons." So all the European countries fell in line. And now, there's a whole bunch of European countries which actually they actually have a higher level of spending on weapons and on the defense industry than the United States does. I think the United States is at 3.2% of GDP, Poland's at 4.5%, and the Baltic countries are all above 3.3. Okay, so now the US can't complain because all these other countries have also promised to increase spending. They are increasing spending. So that didn't work. Okay, so that didn't work. I feel like Trump kind of thought, nah, they're not going to do it. And so then I can say, well, that's it. We're not helping you because you're not helping yourselves. But that didn't work because the European countries are helping themselves. So if he only said now with this crude, this whole thing about not importing Russian crude oil, if he just said, well, if European Union countries, don't stop importing crude oil. But what he said was NATO countries. So the European Union can kind of probably force Hungary and Slovakia to stop importing Russian crude oil. They can help them find other sources and stuff like that and get them to stop. but they can't stop Turkey from doing it. And Turkey is a NATO member. And Turkey is the, I believe, third largest importer of Russian crude oil. Okay. And there's no one that's going to stop Turkey from importing Russian crude oil, not the European Union, and even Ukraine, which has been bombing this Druzhba oil pipeline in Russia, which then stopped, shipments of oil to Hungary and Slovakia. Ukraine's not going to do the same thing against Turkey because Turkey is this kind of ally of Russia, but ally of Ukraine also. So Turkey does help Ukraine, and so Ukraine appreciates this. So Ukraine's not going to, bomb the oil pipeline, which is so crucial to Turkey. Okay, so this is the thing, and so of course there's no way NATO countries are going to all stop purchasing Russian oil. No way, because Turkey's
Oh,
involved.
okay, so let's just assume, I think my working assumption, your working assumption, I think many other, probably most of Congress's working assumption, for at least the Democrats and probably the senators, the Republican senators, to a large extent, their working assumption at this point might be that we have a Russian asset in the presidency, and that what he's doing with respect to Ukraine is part of a bigger picture here. He's also undermining the U.S. economy in a variety of ways. We're not sure how much damage. The U.S. economy is pretty robust and hasn't been that reliant on international trade compared to other countries, but putting on like 50% tariffs on Brazil because you decide you don't like the way they are treating the former president, producing all this uncertainty about our trade policy, uh, uh, trying to deport a significant fraction of the workforce, and just getting involved in threatening different industries if they don't do his bidding. All this stuff is producing economic uncertainty that has, I think, shown up in some of the data with respect to hiring labor force.
Sure. What about this visa this certain visa which brings in highly intelligent people, $100,000?
Restricting the top immigrants from coming to work in the U.S. All these things would be, if you were trying to design a plan to undermine the U.S. economy, this would be the plan without saying it in black and white, without saying it publicly. I'm trying to destroy or limit the U.S. economy or undermine it. And we don't know what's happening on the military side. We know that he has appointed people. He appointed a TV personality to be running the Pentagon, right? So who doesn't seem to understand that you can't be having secure conversations on open airways, right? So,
Sure. Yeah.
In this context, how do you see things going forward? Let's suppose that Ukraine can't rely on the U.S. beyond a limited degree, hopefully the degree to which the U.S. is providing quote assistance. Where do things go from here? Can the Europeans provide enough help? Can the Ukrainians keep Russia out or from advancing further, given their own armament development? Do they have enough troops at this point? And how do you see the whole thing ending? I take it you don't see Ukraine advancing into Ukraine, recapturing captured territory and pushing Russia out of eastern Ukraine entirely. where do you think, I mean, is this going to go on forever? What do you see happening?
No, I don't see it going on forever at all. Well, look, these last many months since Trump's been in power, I think the Europeans, they've had all these. They're asleep. Okay, they're asleep completely, but they were. There's been a lot of eye-opening experiences which have happened, and this is important for Ukraine. And look, right now, NATO, and I'm not the only one saying this. You can consider NATO to be dead right now. Okay, NATO's on hold. It's dead. Call it what you like. They when the Russians sent the Russians actually sent, as you know, it was what, September 9th, I believe, that they sent. It was actually 50 drones they sent towards Poland. Whole bunch got knocked down within Ukraine, but 19 made it across the border into Poland, and 3 were shot down. Now, NATO's sitting here saying that, oh yeah, wow, everything worked out really great. They were, German fighter jets that were, put in the air, and Italian and this and that, and and they all worked together really well to shoot down these 3 drones. Okay, an eye opener is that, and by the way, there was no American involvement. Okay, the Americans did not get involved in that. And when they told Trump about this, and I'm sure you know this, that Poland just got invaded by 19 Russian drones, his response was, well, maybe it was a mistake. Okay, that was his response. When a few days later, Estonia, 3 Russian fighter jets crossed into their territory for 12 minutes. That is a long time. They could have, in those 12 minutes, completely, bombed the Tallinn, the capital, and all this. And then, okay, some other jets were raised and they were chased out, or they didn't really get chased out. They just left, basically. And when Trump was told about this, he said, oh, I didn't hear about it. I'm going to be briefed. And that's basically all he said. Okay. So again, the Americans didn't get involved in that. All right. So I think this is a massive eye opener for the Europeans, that they can see that, you know what? And Trump has now said, oh, yes, of course, we're going to, help out NATO. We're going to defend Europe. He said that. Okay. But he's also said many things which he has not done. Like I said, that he's going to put sanctions on Russia within 2 weeks if they don't do this or that. And he's never done it. So I don't think anyone believes him. Okay. I think actions speak louder than words, and they've done nothing. And NATO has shown itself to be extremely weak. The Russians, last night they had drones over airports in Norway and Denmark. A couple of days, I think the day before that, or was it even the same day, they had intelligence gathering flights also flying within NATO airspace. Okay, I think it was German airspace. So they are testing on a daily basis, NATO and all this, and they're proving that you guys are useless, okay? And the Americans are not helping, and they're useless. They're not doing anything. They're scared. When a Russian bomber flew over Turkish territory, they were warned, and it didn't take the Turks more than a few seconds, actually, to shoot down that bomber jet. Because they warned the Russians, and the Russians didn't pay attention. And what happened after that? Nothing happened. The Russians got upset. They stopped the tourists from going to Turkey, stopped buying Turkish fruits, and that was it, right? Erdogan said sorry a couple of years later, something like this, and so the Russians would buy their fruits and send the tourists again, and then that's it. No nuclear war, no war at all, nothing, no problem, right? And Turkey is one of the strongest NATO members. Okay, nothing happened. What the Russians are proving is that NATO is toothless. And so after this drone attack against Poland, and it's an attack, okay? What did the Poles do? They didn't fly the United States to meet up with Trump. Their Minister of Defense actually went to Ukraine, okay? He went to Ukraine because he realizes the leading country in the world, which gets attacked by over 600 drones, plus ballistic missiles, plus cruise missiles on almost a nightly basis, is Ukraine. Ukraine's the one that knows how to deal with it. Ukraine's the one that has the experience. Ukraine now produces also drones which attack these incoming drones. Plus, they have electronic warfare capabilities to bring down the drones before they even hit, come near the cities. Okay, so they have ways of fighting these drones in various ways. And so the Polish Minister of Defense went to Ukraine. And after this, they created a working group, a Ukrainian-Polish working group, to be able to battle the drones and deal with the drones. So they know it's Ukraine that's going to help them out, right? And when it comes to other NATO countries, I think they understand Ukraine has more tanks than Germany, Britain, Italy, and Spain combined, okay? Never mind all sorts of other weapon systems, and never mind the experience and the know-how, and all of these things of fighting the Russians. So, can Europe rely on the United States?
You just said Ukraine has more tanks?
Yes. Ukraine has more tanks than Germany, Italy, yeah, France and Spain, or the UK. All these countries put together. Ukraine has more. Okay. Plus, there's all sorts of other weapon systems. And by the way, do you know who the leading supplier of tanks is to Ukraine?
Who?
Russia. Okay. Because Ukraine, especially in the 2022 counteroffensive, Ukraine was able to capture dozens and dozens of Russian tanks. So Russia is actually the largest supplier of tanks to Ukraine.
Well,
Okay, so that's just funny, but it's true.
Let's talk about retirement for a minute. It's something Americans think about regularly. Ask yourself, how financially secure do you really feel? Do you have enough money to retire? How much is really enough? And if you don't have enough money, how can you possibly find that extra money before you do retire? These are all tough questions. My retirement software, Maxify Planner, is the powerful online planning tool that takes the guesswork out of retirement. It weighs your assets against your fixed expenses to calculate how much you can safely spend every year for the rest of your life based on when you decide to retire. And it shows you safe ways to find more money. Maxify makes a complicated problem like retirement planning simple. It's accurate, easy to use, and produces what you really seek, peace of mind. So make the smart choice and visit Maxify.com today. Don't miss this opportunity. That's Maxify with an I, Maxify, Maxify.com. Now let's get back to the podcast. Let me ask you this.
Yes.
We have this testing of NATO by Moscow. Is this a prelude for Moscow to engage in some kind of a false flag operation? Say they were attacked by Latvia and just move in and see that NATO does nothing and the US sits back and say, well, let me talk to them. And then we have, what would happen? That happens today. What happens this afternoon, tomorrow?
Well, yeah, look, the only defense for Europe right now, I think, in European capitals, they must be just, trembling, in their pants right now, okay? Because they can see that the United States isn't going to help. And if the war with Ukraine ends, well, then this frees up the Russian armed forces to go and do other things. The way it is right now, the Russians do not have the strength to go and attack a NATO country. They do not, okay? Because they're so occupied with Ukraine right now, they don't have the, they don't have the force to go send in some other country and start some other front or something like this. But if the war were to end with Ukraine, if they were to sign a peace agreement and stop the war with Ukraine, at that moment, yes. And especially because of the amount of weapons that are being produced by Russia itself also, including drones and artillery. And they import something like 50% of their artillery pieces come from North Korea, okay? And something important also to mention is that Russia has now proven, because nobody's doing anything against Russia, there are no sanctions from the part of the United States. Trump is helping Russia. The Russians have come out and they're now going to sell nuclear-powered submarine reactors, okay, engines, to the North Koreans. What does that mean? I mean, if you're such a, you're Trump's such an America first person, he should be, making massive complaints about this and impose massive sanctions against Russia. Because as soon as the North Koreans have that capability, that changes everything. That means the North Koreans, they'll still have to develop such submarines, but those submarines could then potentially be sent off the west coast of the United States and endanger U.S. cities, and they have nuclear weapons already.
East
So
Coast
that means,
as well, Washington, D.C., Potomac, they could be in the Potomac, right?
sure. So so this is a massive threat to the United States. Has Trump said anything? No, nothing. Okay. Also, the Russians have now signed an agreement, and I believe this was today actually, with the Iranians, okay, to help them make nuclear reactors. Okay, for their nuclear not for weapons, supposedly not to make weapons, but just for their power facilities. Okay, that's a threat to Israel, of course, which makes it a threat to the United States also. So there's nothing good about that. I don't hear the Trump administration making loud noises about this. So see, Russia is doing far worse things now because it's not being stopped in Ukraine. So the Europeans are understanding that if this war ends in Ukraine, they're in big trouble because they're not ready. They're not ready to fight. And what Putin's now shown this last 2 weeks is that he keeps sending in airplanes and drones and all these things. NATO is not ready. They could only down 3 drones out of 19. And these drones, by the way, these were decoy drones. So they were not armed. They're decoy drones, but they definitely came from Russia, and it was meant to test the water. So this also shows that this was not a mistake. Decoy drones are not sent into, I mean, some decoy drones are sent into Ukraine, but along with all sorts of real drones, to bomb places. It was only decoy drones sent into Poland because, of course, they didn't want to really bomb something. They just want to test NATO. And they did. And they proved that NATO, it was a massive failure. They could only down 3 drones. And what did they do after that? What, they called in ambassadors, wrote a note to the Russians? I mean, that is weak. That is extremely weak. Which after that, of course, they sent the 3 aircraft into Estonia and so on and so on and so on. So they are actually destroying NATO right now just by proving that NATO is toothless. Okay, it's toothless. It's weak. The United States is not helping, and this is a massive problem now for the Europeans. So for the Europeans, however, for Ukraine, this shows that, you know what? They need to help Ukraine because Ukraine is actually their only protection right now. The fact that the Ukrainian forces are fighting the Russians, they know how to fight them, and they are fighting them, and they're hitting them hard. And I think this means that the Europeans, even more so, are going to support Ukraine, give Ukraine even more weapons. They're doing all sorts of things to help Ukraine produce these weapons by financing Ukrainian weapons manufacturers to produce weapons for Ukraine. There are now things where I think the Danes, or was it the Swedes, where I do not remember, are going to allow Ukraine to make its ballistic missile fuel in that country. Okay, I can't remember again whether it was
I think it's
Denmark.
Denmark. Denmark, yeah.
Denmark. I think I'm thinking Denmark because they're a real leader in helping out Ukraine actually. So they are helping out Ukraine as much as they can, and it's getting more and more because they can see, no, Trump is not going to help. I mean, Trump is on the side of Russia. I think nobody's going to openly say that, of course, because they can't, and of course they need to have the Americans on their side as much as possible. And if Trump is at least selling weapons to NATO countries to help Ukraine, that's already good. But by the way, it was Denmark. It was Denmark, yes, sorry, that recently wanted to buy Patriot missile systems, and in the end, they did not. Okay, and it's because they were actually refused by the Pentagon. So this is strange. You would think, well, hold on a second. I mean, the Americans would have made lots and lots of money out of this sale. But they said, but the excuse was by this Elbridge Colby guy that, well, no, we need these weapons for ourselves. Okay, well, this is
This
very
goes back to trying to take over Greenland, probably.
exactly. So this is very fishy though. So of course, the Danes then went and purchased the SAMP-T system, which is an Italian, French. I think the Brits are included in that one actually. The manufacture that. So but I mean, how is this good for the United States that they didn't sell these weapons? I mean, that's not good for the U.S. economy.
So how do you see things? We have like a couple minutes left here. How do you see things evolving? All this looks, pretty dangerous. I mean, Russia could say we're just going to move our efforts into the Baltics, and we can become a larger part. We've got basically everything we like for the moment in Ukraine. We'll just now expand Mother Russia in the Baltics and just have a false flag operation. I could see that occurring, and I could see, is Poland, who's going to actually then come to the Baltics support once the Russians have taken over the entire Baltics. Then you've got the issue is that would the Polish army then be at war with Russia by itself? Does this look like at the end of World War II, when Poland was there was an uprising to kick the Nazis out because they thought the Russians were going to come to support the Poles. If I have this history correct,
The Warsaw Uprising.
The Russians held back, and then many Poles were killed, and then they moved in. So there's a real treachery going on, the initial treachery, which was the Ribbentrop Pact, right?
Of course, yeah, yeah,
Dividing up
yeah.
Poland at the beginning with Hitler. Uh,
Okay.
so, I mean, could that be the next thing we see?
Well, yeah. Look, I'll go back to another thing about why do I think Russia has been testing NATO now in these last few weeks? I think one of the reasons for it is also to show NATO that look, you guys are weak, right? And you don't have enough weapons, you don't have enough capabilities, and you should stop helping Ukraine and probably arm yourselves. So, not that Russia's saying this, but I think they want to prove to, probably maybe on the one hand, they are saying that, look, stop arming Ukraine because, they can continue doing this sort of thing. So maybe they're trying to use this as leverage to have other countries stop helping out Ukraine, but also simply for Europeans to say, oh, listen, we have to stop giving Ukraine weapons. We need to arm ourselves. So let's not give them as much money for weapons or even sell them weapons or give them weapons because we need those for ourselves to defend ourselves from Russia. Okay. So I think this is also a reason why Russia has been doing this lately. But back to what you just said, again, as long as Ukraine is fighting, and by the way, in the last few weeks also, Ukraine has pushed the Russians back in certain areas. So in the Sumy Oblast, right in the north on the border with Russia, Russia had an incursion there, and Ukraine's been pushing them back there. Also in the Pokrovsk area, which, by the way, it's been over a year that the Russians thought they would take Pokrovsk. They have not. So they have not taken any little town. They don't take any major cities, but no little town even in the last year. And so there also, they took a sliver of land, actually. So they were able to go through a weak spot in the Ukraine defense lines. They took a sliver of land, but they didn't know what to do with it. Basically, they occupied it, and that was it. Ukraine then sent in some of its best assault forces, which actually encircled the Russians. They've had now over 100 Russian prisoners that they took. I mean, there's been, massive deaths there also on the Russian side because of this. The Russians kind of, they took over this territory, but they were not prepared to hold it actually and defend it. So Ukrainians have pushed them back there also. So this just goes to show Ukraine's doing much better now than it was doing even 6 months ago. Ukraine is stronger now, and especially with these long distance capabilities, which are now coming online, the ballistic.
So do you see a ceasefire with Russia evolving in the next 6 months, potentially, when these, what's the name of the missile system again that the Ukrainians?
The Flamingo is the cruise missile system.
When
Yeah,
the
that reaches
comes on, and then do you also see the potential for Russia to invade the Baltics? Is that Romania somewhere?
Look, I do not think, like I said, Russia's far too weak right now to take on more countries. Okay, so it cannot. This is why when what happened in our Azerbaijan, when Azerbaijan liberated its territory from Armenia, Russia couldn't even get involved. When Syria was being overtaken, by the rebels, when the rebels got rid of Assad and stuff, Russia couldn't help out. Russia's extremely weak. So, Russia certainly can't invade another country, like the Baltics. As small as they are, nonetheless, they're NATO members, and NATO would have to do something. Poland would definitely probably help because it wouldn't want to fight on its own territory. It would probably, hit the Russians there instead. So I can't see that happening. I cannot see that happening now while Russia is extremely busy with Ukraine. It is not getting anywhere in Ukraine. It would definitely not get anywhere in the Baltics.
Do you see a ceasefire?
It does not have the power to do that right now. It's only if the war with Ukraine were to stop, then they could do something. And even then, I don't think they would do anything right away. They would probably wait, rearm, get much stronger, and then they would do something. Okay, but not now.
Do you see a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, here's the funny thing. Look, when Putin invaded Ukraine with the large-scale invasion in February 2022, I think he had extremely bad intelligence. Since then, we know because and this is actually interesting because this is actually something which is extremely important in a democracy, is that you can tell the commander-in-chief, your president, prime minister, whoever, bad news. You can tell them that something's wrong has happened, that there's bad news. I mean, the worst that's going to happen, you're going to get fired, right? But in Russia, you will die. You will be pushed out of a window on a top floor, or you may be killed, imprisoned, whatever. So they don't tell Putin things that he doesn't want to hear. So we know of all sorts of cases, even in the war, where commanders will claim that they took over a village, but they have not. And then what happens is Russian forces think they took over, that Russian forces occupied that village. They will send in troops, but those troops will get massacred because that village is not under Russian occupation. The Ukrainians hold that village. And so this is the thing. It's this problem in the Russian mindset that they're scared to tell their commanders, their leaders, and then their president what's going on. So I think Putin he actually believes that Russia is winning this war. Because, it's funny because there are Russian ministers, like minister of like of the economy or whatever, or I don't know what exactly, I can't remember right now, who actually came out and said the Russian economy is experiencing problems. And that if the Russians have officially said this, that a minister's actually come out and said this, it's actually much, much worse. So the situation is actually much worse if they actually come out and say it. But Putin himself, days later, said, "No, everything's great. Everything's great with our economy. Everything's great." Okay, so I don't know. Did he not even listen to his own, Minister of Economy or what? Or I
Okay,
don't
so
know.
let me ask you my question one more time, which is, do you think there's going to be a ceasefire in the next? Is there any prospect for that happening 6 months from now, once the Ukrainian missiles are inflicting even more damage onto the Russian economy?
Right. Well, this is tricky, you see, because I mean, the Russians, when Trump got into power, I mean, he was trying to, force a ceasefire, and he was trying to do everything so there would be a ceasefire, and it's the Russians who were saying no. So the Ukrainians played the game and said, yes, 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 ceasefire, yes, of course, yes, we want this, we'll do everything Trump says, But it was the Russians who were proven that they didn't want the ceasefire, and they don't want to end the war without their major objectives, which are ridiculous. These are,
Yeah, I know.
there's no way anyone in Ukraine could ever agree to them, right? So I don't see a ceasefire happening because unless the Russian army is on the verge of collapse. And by the way, everything that Ukraine is doing and about to do with these long-range strikes and all these things will hurt the Russian army also. So not just their economy, not only their oil and gas exports, but also, I mean, the Russian army itself. They're hitting weapons manufacturing facilities. And so this will have a major effect on the armed forces also. We know that they're in serious trouble. Their army is in trouble. They have very few weapons that they can use. Tanks, for example. I mean, they're using them rarely now because they have so few. And so this is a major problem for them. When they attack, they're attacking small groups of just men, sending like 5 men, 10 men, all of them get massacred. Sometimes they'll take over some sort of a little trench or something. Then, they'll send more men, and that's how they try to advance. Okay. So it's not done in some sort of, massive military attack because they'll just get eliminated by the Ukrainian forces. So that's not how it's done. I can't see them. So a ceasefire. Again, how are they going to have a ceasefire? Well, maybe if the Russians are feeling the pain and will say, okay, they understand that, okay, look, they need to have a ceasefire. From the Ukrainian side, well, ceasefire would be nice, I guess, to take a rest. But if we see that they're on the verge of collapse, then why give them breathing room? Why? I don't see that either. So
this is going to go on for a while.
I don't see it. I don't see a ceasefire. Well, listen, there's lots of times in war where, one side is simply, they've collapsed. Okay. I can see the Russian army collapsing at some point. Because their people don't know why they're there. They don't know why they're fighting. If there's no money to pay them, and a lot of the majority of the people there are there because they're being paid handsomely. But when the money starts running dry, because of what Ukraine is going to be doing with their oil and gas facilities and stuff, then, and these people are getting paid less and less, or even not getting paid. Well, this may be a problem. These people may be saying, well, listen, the only reason I came was because I was getting paid something, or even people signing up are getting signed, they get large sign-up bonuses. But when this runs out, they may say, well, the hell with that. Why am I going to go die for nothing? They're not doing it for patriotic reasons. On the Ukrainian side, it's for patriotic reasons. These people understand that the country needs to be defended. So people are being paid also, and we're being helped at least by the European Union and
one
Canada,
last question, Andrew, which is, troops. Is Ukraine short on manpower and woman power? I mean, that's the word we hear in the West here, that you just don't have enough recruitment. People are not volunteering. You have people deserting, leaving the country. Uh, what's the story?
Well, look, they would definitely want more troops. So to say that it's not a problem is not true. To say, however, that this is like a massive disaster, oh my God, you can't get enough troops, it's a problem, but it's not a disaster or something like this. So for now, it's okay. This is why Ukraine is relying massively on drones, okay? Because that saves manpower. That means that they don't have to send human beings to attack. They've got drones to do that. And so this is why Ukraine is so reliant now on drones. That saves people. And the Ukrainian forces do not fight like the Russian forces. The Russian forces send in people on these meat assaults where they just massively dying. Ukraine doesn't do that. We don't have the manpower to do that, and that's why they're relying on drones. However, I would be careful with saying that, oh, gee, they can't find people. There's people fleeing the country, this and that. It's not that bad. Okay. I think the Russian side tries to, and I always see this actually from people who are, you know, who have tried to give these true pro-Russian talking points about, oh, Ukraine is forcing men into the army. They're forcing men in the army. But I'll tell you, in Ukraine, you walk around downtown, you'll see lots and lots of young men walking around over the age of 25, because under the age of 25, they do not get recruited. But over the age of 25, you'll see lots of people walking around. In Ukraine, you have to register. So if you're a man, you need to register with this app, with the military, okay, to say that here's my address. I've registered, and as long as you've done that, you're okay. Yes, sure, there are people who get arrested, and that's because those people didn't register. They, have been hiding or something like this, and so if they get caught, yeah, they'll get arrested. Okay, but people who are just, doing the legal thing to do, they're fine. They're not being recruited. Okay, so there may come a time when they do get the notice to come to the recruitment office to fight. Yes, but it's just to say, it's not like, oh my God, all the men are in hiding. It's this massive problem. It's not like that. Like I said, it could be better, right? I mean, Ukraine, of course, could have many, many more men, and it would be much better, of course. So it is a problem, but it's not a disaster. Okay, it is not a disaster.
So, Andrew, this has been another extremely valuable update on Ukraine, and we wish you and your family the best and the safety, and certainly I wish everything good for Ukraine, and that it succeeds in this terrible conflict and does so quickly. So many thanks, and we'll be remain in touch and have you back on.
Yes, thank you very much, Larry. Thanks. Yeah, always a pleasure, and hope to speak to you soon. And all the best in the U.S. because yes, you have lots of problems of your own with Trump. So all the best to you too.
Thank you. Thanks.